Hi guys, I would like to thank everyone who donates to the Patreon account. The donations keep the show going. My computer is ready to go kaput after 8 years, so the Patreon fund will help me get another computer, and that will, in turn, enable me to churn out more episodes. There will be more giveaways in the future, and just a reminder, you don't have to give a lot. $1 a month would do. Any amount would be appreciated. Once again, the Patreon account is located at www.patreon.com/leader1. That's Patreon and LEADERONE. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Why do you seem so scared? All I wanted to do was play with you. Please come and play with me. I am so lonely. You're not afraid of the dark, are you? Don't be afraid. Come with me. I will show you where I play hide and seek. Do you want to play hide and seek? You hide, and I'll find you.
Dean Arnold Corll was born on Christmas Eve 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, to Mary Emma Robinson and Arnold Edwin Corll. Arnold was a very strict disciplinarian, while his mother was more nurturing and protective. She played an interventionist role whenever she could. After years of heated arguments, Arnold and Emma divorced. She and their 2 sons relocated to Memphis, Tennessee, after Arnold was drafted into the Air Force. She wanted to ensure that the boys would remain in touch with their father. Dean's disposition as a child was remembered as serious and shy. He seldom socialized with other children. He did, however, frequently express concern about the well-being of others. In 1950, Dean was examined by doctors who detected a heart murmur. Further investigation revealed that he had an undiagnosed case of rheumatic fever. His doctors strongly advised against participating in sports, including in gym class at school, much to young Dean's disappointment. Dean's parents took a turn at reconciliation and remarried in 1950. Soon after, they moved to Pasadena, Texas. The marriage was short-lived, and Dean's parents got divorced again in 1953. Emma got full custody, with regular visits being granted to Arnold. Emma met a traveling clock salesman by the name of Jack West. They moved to the town of Vidor, Texas. They had a daughter together in 1955. Taking the advice of a pecan salesman, Jack and Emma started a small candy business called Pecan Prince, which they started in their garage. Young Dean worked many hours for the family business whenever he wasn't in school. Dean attended high school from 1954 to 1958. He was well behaved and achieved satisfactory, if unremarkable, grades. He was a loner, though he occasionally dated girls. His only extracurricular activity was playing trombone in the school band. After Dean graduated high school in 1958, his family moved to the outskirts of Houston to be closer to their clientele. Dean moved to live with his grandmother in 1960 after she became widowed. He became intimately involved with a girl there, but when she broached the subject of marriage, he rejected the proposition. His mother divorced Jack West in 1963. With her knowledge of and experience in the candy business, she started one of her own, which would compete with her ex-husband's in the years to come. Dean was appointed vice president. Dean was accused of sexual harassment by one of their teenage male employees that year. Emma fired the worker. 1965. Dean was granted a hardship discharge from the Army after being drafted and serving for 10 months. It was issued on the grounds that the survival of his family's business was threatened by his absence. Soon after, he confided in his most trusted friends that he was homosexual. He also told them he had had a few sexual encounters with men. Some of his friends noted that his conduct in the company of teenage boys was markedly different than when he socialized with other people. His former stepfather's candy company was still thriving, and Pecan Prince was fierce competition for the Corll Candy Company. Dean resumed his work as vice president as he, his mother, his brother, and other employees struggled to keep up with demand for their popular products. The business relocated in 1965 to 22nd Street, which was directly across from Helms Elementary School. Dean became well known in the neighborhood for giving free candy to the local children. He was especially generous with teenaged boys. He was rewarded with 2 nicknames, Candyman and the Pied Piper. He flirted with all the teenaged boys who worked for the company. To further facilitate this, he installed a pool table at the rear of the candy factory. It became a popular attraction for employees and local youths of comparable age to loiter and socialize. 1967. Dean Corll befriended a boy named David Owen Brooks, then 12 years old. David was one of the innumerable children to whom Corll gave candy. David became part of the coterie of youths who hung around the factory by the pool table. Before long, David would accompany Dean on the trips he took with other youths to the beaches of South Texas. Brooks enjoyed Corll's company because he was one of the only people he met who did not mock his appearance. David was bespectacled and endured a great deal of bullying as a consequence. When David needed money, he would ask Dean Corll, who would give him some. David came to view Corll as a paternal figure. 1968. The Corll Candy Company closed. Corll's mother and his half-sister relocated to Colorado. Dean took a job as an electrician at Houston Lighting and Power Company. 1969. Corll pressured David Brooks into having sexual relations with him, and sex became a mainstay of their relationship. He would give Brooks gifts or money to allow him to perform oral sex on him. 1970. Amid the chaotic breakup of his family with his parents' divorce, David added more chaos to his life by dropping out of high school. He was 15 years old. By this time, he came to regard Dean Corll's apartment as his second home. Dean did not approve of David's decision to drop out of school. David defended it by saying, "I just sort of dropped out, Dean. I cannot cope with Mom and Dad's divorce anymore, you know." Dean recognized it was time for sensitivity and consoled David, saying, "I understand. Come, sit down. Please stop crying." David joined Dean on the sofa. He regarded Corll as his best friend by this time. He asked him, "What is going to become of me?" Dean's prognosis was unforgivingly truthful and bleak. Your parents aren't going to support you if you're not going to school anymore. Divorced or not, you will have to get a job somewhere, Dave. David said, "I know, but that is going to take a week or two. What do I do in the meantime?" Dean said, "Well, you can stay here for a while, until you find a job, that is." Corll truly sympathized with David. Dean and David's relationship had become very close, and David was willing to do almost anything for him. running errands, and performing odd jobs only went so far as currency with Dean Corll as far as David Brooks was concerned. It was sexual favors Dean most wanted now. He did all he could to obtain the boy's consent, but it wasn't forthcoming. That is, until now. David was vulnerable. He was essentially homeless and broke. He was desperate for money and ripe for exploitation. 1970s Texas was not the most liberal time and place when it came to societal attitudes regarding homosexuality. If information about the nature of Dean Corll's sexual orientation had fallen into the wrong hands, assault and battery could have been the likely outcome. Any encounters of a sexual nature between two males was something that had to be kept under wraps to ensure the survival of both participants. Corll felt that his friendship with David Brooks was ready to be elevated to the next level. He assumed that because David's parents were divorced and wrapped up in their own lives, they wouldn't care much about what David was doing, and were therefore unlikely to find out what he was doing with Corll. David was grateful to Dean for his offer of accommodations, saying, "Thank you, Dean. Thank you for that. I won't sponge on you, I promise. It's just until I get a job to support myself." Dean said, "You're welcome. There's more than enough space for 2 people, and the fridge is filled with food." Dean placed his arm around David's shoulder. "Aren't you hot in those jeans? It must be close to 105 out there." Desperate or not, David was having none of this. He pushed Dean's arm away and said, "My legs are fine. It's the shirt and the shoes that are killing me." He removed his t-shirt and kicked his sneakers off. Dean brought them both a beer. After taking a swig, he said, "Listen, Dave, you know that thing we talked about last week?" "What thing?" "You know, the thing." No, we can't do that, Dean. I mean, I like you and everything, but I'll give you $5. That is approximately $34 Corll suddenly felt ashamed. This, despite the fact that not only had he come to terms with being gay, but he had recently accepted the fact that he was a pederast as well. The part that left him feeling unclean inside was the fact that he was paying for it. This he considered to be a matter of taking things too far. The seasons were swift in turning, and the shame withered on the vine, falling to the abyss. He was now prepared to make his case with heightened confidence. "Think about it, David. $5. You need the money, and I have the money." Given Corll's generous salary and minimal living expenses, $5 was pocket money for him. David sighed. He said, "It's not about the money." It turned out that his reluctance to engage in sexual interactions with Dean Corll was motivated more by fear of failure than anything else. He was inexperienced, essentially. It had nothing to do with Corll's appearance, with most people agreeing he was handsome. After giving Corll's proposal more thought, David finally said, "All right, but only this once, okay?" Honoring his word, Dean gave David the $5. Following up on this, he said to David, "Very well then, let's do this." September. David Brooks stayed at Dean Corll's place for 2 weeks. He was hired by a grocery store and soon moved back to his mother's house. During those 2 weeks, David and Dean had had a few sexual encounters, but Corll was not satisfied. It was partly due to the death of novelty. The other factor that scrubbed the sheen off the situation was the lack of control Corll had over the situation. He had to pay for David's consent, and it was no kind of aphrodisiac. Corll needed to find what he wanted in a young man elsewhere. He hadn't heard from David in 10 days, and even a dry spell of such diminutive magnitude was more than he could withstand. One day he was driving when he stopped at the intersection of Westheimer Road and South Voss. He spotted a teenaged hitchhiker thumbing his appeal for transportation. Dean rolled down his window. "Hey there." The boy said, "Afternoon, mister. Are you going in the direction of the Braeswood Place district by any chance?" "Hop in. Braeswood is just a couple of miles from my place." The boy got in the car. He extended his hand to Corll. "I'm Jeffrey. Thanks for the ride." "Dean Corll, nice to meet you, Jeffrey. Where are you from?" "I'm originally from here, but I'm actually a freshman at the University of Texas in Austin. I'm in town for the weekend to visit my girlfriend." "Is she living in Braeswood?" "No, she's up in Dyersdale. Braeswood is where my parents live. I first have to get cleaned up before I pay her a visit." "I see." Corll smelled the odor of marijuana coming from Jeffrey's clothing. He drove for a while, and nary a word was said between them until Corll pulled onto Yorktown Street. Dean slowed down and said, "Listen, Jeffrey, that is my apartment up ahead. We just have to make a quick stop before I take you to your parents' house, okay?" "No problem, I'll wait in the van." Dean turned into the driveway of his apartment complex. He switched off the ignition. He said, "Why don't you come in for a minute? We could share a joint, and I have some beer in the fridge." Initially reluctant, Jeffrey followed Corll inside. He was due to meet with his girlfriend at 8 p.m., so there was more than enough time to smoke a joint and have a couple of beers. Once inside Corll's apartment, Dean asked Jeffrey if he wanted something to eat. He declined, but was eager to take him up on his offering of beer. They drank beer and smoked a joint while Corll got to know Jeffrey better. Minutes later, he began making sexual advances toward Jeffrey. He was rebuffed, with Jeffrey pushing him away. Dean was outraged. He punched Jeffrey in the face as hard as he could. He ran to his television cabinet and grabbed a length of nylon rope. Jeffrey was sprawled on the floor, nursing a bloody nose. Being much larger than Jeffrey, Corll was able to overpower him and tie his hands together. Jeffrey panicked, screaming, "No! Somebody! Help! Please!" Corll shut him up by stuffing a cloth serviette into his mouth. He punched Jeffrey on his temple, which knocked him out. While Jeffrey's body was bereft of energy in his unconscious state, Dean Corll, on the other hand, was energized. He was running on adrenaline now. He had all the power, and that was the end goal of his endeavor. Realizing this opportunity was likely to be short-lived, he tried to sodomize Jeffrey. This appeared to have jolted Jeffrey awake, for he woke with a grunting sound and spat out the serviette. He started screaming again and kicked back at Corll. Dean ran to the television cabinet again. He got more nylon rope and a roll of duct tape. Jeffrey was yelling, "Help! Somebody help! Help!" Corll stuffed the serviette back in his mouth. He sealed it in with duct tape. He bound Jeffrey's ankles together with rope. This was still not enough control for Dean Corll. He wrapped his hands around Jeffrey's throat. He squeezed it with all available force. Having overcome Jeffrey's unwillingness to submit, he stood. He kicked him in the ribs. He said, "Wake up!" Jeffrey was unresponsive. Corll crouched down and slapped his face. "I said wake up." He was horrified. He hadn't expected this. Jeffrey was dead. Hence, the beginning of Dean Corll's life as a murderer. Corll drove to a hardware store and returned with a bag of lime powder and a roll of transparent plastic sheeting. He cut all of Jeffrey's clothing off, save for his socks. His hands and feet were still bound. The serviette remained in his mouth. Corll laid a 4-yard section of plastic sheeting on the carpet. He covered it in lime. He pulled Jeffrey's lifeless body over and placed it on the plastic. He rolled him over, cocooning him in the plastic. Though he feared the prospects of legal prosecution for killing Jeffrey, he was also exhilarated by what he had done. He had held the power of life and death in his hands, and Jeffrey's journey in one direction or the other was dependent entirely upon his whim. Just before the stroke of midnight, he placed David's corpse in a sleeping bag. He loaded it into his van, along with a garden shovel. He drove him to High Island Beach. He buried him next to a boulder by which he played hide and seek as a child. The next day, Saturday, Dean Corll continued to ruminate over the actions he carried out the night before, and he was exhilarated still. Sunday morning, Corll drove to a supermarket to buy a newspaper. He was shocked to see that missing person notices were posted all over the neighborhood. Part of the text printed therein consisted of, "Missing Jeffrey Conan. Last seen in Uptown Houston. $1,000 reward." There was a photograph of Jeffrey Conan in the poster, and it was unmistakable. It was the man Corll killed. A trace of remorse crept in, but it was submerged in a wave of cold analysis. His prospects for a future as a free man became his primary consideration. He had to be more careful the next time he selected a victim. December 13th, 1970. Dean met 2 teenage boys at a religious rally in a district known as the Heights, which is west of downtown Houston. When Jimmy Glass and Danny Yates walked out of their church, they stumbled upon Dean Corll's white Ford Econoline van. Dean was leaning against it. He said, "Hey, you guys, care for some free beer?" The boys introduced themselves, though they were wary. Jimmy said, "Why would you just give us free beer?" "Because I'm a nice dude, and I could use some company. I got fired from my job yesterday." "Where is the beer?" "Here in the van, and I have more at my apartment if you'd like to join me. I will drop you off at your respective houses afterwards. Where do you guys live?" Danny said, "We're both from Spring Branch." Jimmy was still circumspect. He elbowed Danny in his ribs. Danny said to him, "Come on, James. Don't be such a party pooper. It will be fun. Let's live a little." Still trepidatious, James nevertheless followed Danny into the van. Dean handed a can of beer to both of them. He also gave them both a business card. He said, "That is where I used to work. Write down your home addresses on the back of the cards, and I'll show you a secret later on." It seemed to both boys that nothing untoward would come from granting this request, so they wrote their addresses on the cards. By the time Dean pulled up to his apartment complex, the boys had both polished off 2 beers. Dean gave the boys more beer while he had them in his apartment. They were inexperienced with alcohol, and they were highly inebriated. Corll was more prepared for these victims. He purchased 4 sets of handcuffs at a sex shop. He also brought up a large sheet of plywood from his rental boat shed. The boys were staggeringly drunk when he said to them, "Let me show you something." He took the boys to his bedroom. The plywood board was sitting against a wall. A number of holes were hammered into it. Handcuffs and nylon ropes of varied lengths were hanging from the board. Corll said to them, "This is my procedure board. If you'll allow me to attach you to it, I will show you an impressive trick." Too drunk to understand or care, the boys allowed Corll to cuff and tie them to the torture board. They only began to panic when it became clear that Corll was in no hurry to set them free. It was certainly sobering for Jimmy, who said, "What are you doing? What are you going to do to us?" Corll said, "It's just a little game. Relax, and you might enjoy it." Danny started to cry. He shouted, "No, I want to go home." Dean said, "Shut the fuck up, you sissy." Corll taped their mouths shut with duct tape. Suddenly a voice Dean Corll recognized, but that did not belong to Jimmy Glass or Danny Yates, spoke. "What the hell?" Dean Corll spun around and was stunned to see David Brooks. He had given David a key to the apartment. He said to him, "David, what are you doing here? I'm just having a bit of fun, man." David made a beeline for the front door. Corll tried to catch up with him, but he heard the sound of Brooks' motorcycle departing outside before he could even get out the door. He gave up and let him get away. He locked the front door. Dean Corll returned to his bedroom. He raped both Jimmy and Danny. Having satisfied his carnal desires, he strangled them with an electrical cord. He took both bodies that night to his boat shed storage facility on Silver Bell Street. It was a steel container with a dirt floor. He covered them in lime powder and buried them. He left a garbage bag filled with their clothing in the shed. Dean Corll returned to his apartment. Now it was time to make use of the business cards the boys wrote their addresses on. He wrote this message on a postcard to be mailed to Jimmy's family. "Dear Mom and Dad, I have found a nice job in Austin, so I'm dropping out of school. The job is at a youth hostel, therefore I'm getting free boarding and food. Don't worry. I will visit when I get a chance. Love, Jimmy." He sent a similar message to the family of Danny Yates. He wasn't aware of it at the time, but the mailbox he put them into was no longer in service. It was because of his assumption that the families got the postcards that he was shocked to see missing persons posters for both boys in the coming week. December 18th, 1970. Dean Corll invited David Brooks to pay him a visit at his home. David didn't expect to see almost all of Corll's belongings in boxes. He said to Corll, "Where are you going?" Dean said, "I found a nice place on Mangum Road, but more about that later. Let's eat first. I've made us spaghetti bolognese with meatballs and tomato relish." After finishing dinner, Corll poured them both a whiskey sour and they adjourned to the lounge. Dean had a very important issue to discuss with David. "Look, Dave, those boys you saw me with on Sunday night, I was just having a bit of fun with them, you know." "Yeah, and now they are both missing. What have you done with them?" "There's this gay pornography ring running all the way from the East Coast to the West. I've been paid a lot of money to send those boys over to California to pose for some nude pictures. I don't want you to tell anybody about what you've seen. People might form a misconception of me. There's some money in this for you as well, but you will have to keep quiet about it, okay?" David said, "The police aren't looking for them anymore." "What did you say? Why not?" Jimmy's mom told some of the other kids that the police said that they were runaways. They said that both Jimmy and Danny had been seen at a house where runaways often gathered before hitting the road, hitchhiking and eventually becoming part of hippie movements. Corll was relieved. "Well, that's good news then." He stood and said, "Come here. I want to show you something." A used green Chevrolet Corvette was parked in the driveway outside of Corll's apartment. Gesturing to the car, he said to David, "What do you think of this beauty?" "Your new wheels? I saw it earlier, but I thought it was someone else's." "It is." Dean gave the keys to David. "It's yours, Dave." "Wow, why? I mean, thank you, but why?" "For you to keep our little secret about Jimmy and Danny. Let's take a ride. There will be a lot of cops on the street on a Friday night, and you don't have your license yet. Let me drive for now." "This pornographic ring pays incredibly well, Dave, so if you want to, you can become part of it. You will be rich in no time, I'm telling you." "What do I have to do?" The gay porn ring was a construct born in Dean Corll's imagination. "For every boy you can bring to me, I will pay you $200. The money was appealing. Adjusted for inflation, $219.70 is approximately 1,300 2021 American dollars. The deal was getting sweeter, yet it was more suspect than ever. David had his doubts. He said, "Why me?" "Because I like you, Dave." "No, I mean not only me. Why anybody? If you get the boys yourself, you could save $200 every time, see?" "That is the dilemma, my friend." Dean had driven back to the apartment and parked the car. "The boys are reluctant to join an older man. I was just lucky with Jimmy and Danny. However, if a peer asks a boy of, let's say, 15 to come with him to a party, now that's a whole different story." Corll paused for a moment to let that sink in. He had a trump card and wanted to wait to play it at the right moment. In that moment, he said, "And if that peer's driving a cool green Chevy Corvette, don't you think the boy would want to get in and go to a party like an adult?" David smiled widely. January 30th, 1971. David lured 2 new victims to Dean Corll's new apartment on Mangum Road. Having consumed 8 beers, David walked into Dean's living room elated. Referring to the 2 teenage boys who followed him into the apartment, he said, "Dean, meet the brothers Waldrop, our very first visitors this year. This here's Jerry, and over there we have his older brother, Donald." David met them in a bowling alley nearby. Corll put some music on the stereo. David said to him, "I told them we are going to play some adult games, and that there will be $200 in it for each of them." Dean said, "There sure will be." Dean Corll placed 4 $100 bills on a coffee table. He said to the boys, wagging his finger, "But only after the games have been concluded." Donald Waldrop asked, "What are the games about?" Dean was rubbing his hands together like a comic book villain. Just as ominously, he said, "Let me first ask you this. How old are you?" 15. Corll turned to Jerry. "And you?" 13. "There's no need to be scared, Jerry," Dean told him. "I have a feeling you are going to enjoy the games much more than your brother." "What do we have to do?" "Come, let me show you." Dean led the boys to his bedroom while David helped himself to some beer in the kitchen. Donald was handcuffed and tied to the plywood torture board. Jerry was not bound. Dean explained the game to both brothers. It's a pretend game where a prisoner is not cooperating, and the prison guards need to punish him. "Donald, you are obviously the prisoner. Jerry, you and I are the guards." Corll walked over to a wardrobe and brought out a rubber whip. Donald was terrified. He said, "You aren't going to hit me with that thing, are you?" Dean pressed the whip into Jerry's chest. He said to him, Now hit your brother. Donald was whimpering now. He said, "No, please." Jerry said, "I can't do it, sir." Dean said, "Look, boys, this is the game. If you don't want to play it, you will not get the money on the coffee table. Now, hit your brother." Jerry made a half-hearted attempt to whip his brother, but only grazed his back. Corll became irate and impatient. He said to Jerry, "For fuck's sakes, what are you, a girl? Hit the damn prisoner. Beat him to death." Jerry dropped the whip and started to cry. Dean grabbed him and forced him onto the torture board, where he cuffed him next to his brother. He secured him further by tying his ankles to the torture board with nylon rope. David Brooks just stood there, watching. Corll went back to the wardrobe. This time he emerged with a hunting knife. He cut all the clothes from the brothers' bodies. He said, "If you don't want to listen, you will feel." He whipped their buttocks with aggression and rage. The boys screamed, but their voices were unheard due to loud music being played in the living room and in a nightclub across the street. By the time Corll was finished with them, their buttocks and legs were purple, with streams of blood snaking their way down. The boys were trembling and crying. Corll wasn't finished. He raped both boys. Anxious to bury the evidence as always, he strangled them both to death. He was so worked up, the rape and strangulations took less than 5 minutes. David Brooks and Dean Corll wrapped the boys in plastic sheets and loaded them into his van. They buried them at the Silver Bell Street boat shed. March 9th, 1971, Houston, Texas. Dean Corll and David Brooks took to the streets looking for fresh blood. They found it in a boy that Corll recognized as being an acquaintance of David's. It was Randall Harvey, who had been a classmate of Brooks in high school. They pulled over and accosted Randall. David said to him, "Hey Randy, what's up?" "Nothing much, you?" "We're having a big party tonight. This here's my friend Dean. He has more beer and weed in his apartment than a police evidence compound will ever have." "I shit you not. It's going to be one hell of a get-together. All the cool kids are coming. Do you want to join us?" "Sorry, I can't. I'm working night shift." Dean asked Randall, "Where do you work?" Corll was very pleased with Randall's appearance. "It's a part-time job at the gas station over in Oak Forest. I work as an attendant from 6 until 10 every Tuesday and Thursday night." Dean rubbed his hands together. He said, "How much do they pay you?" $8 per shift." "That's $2 an hour, right?" Randall nodded. He looked at his watch. "Listen, thanks for the invitation, but I really have to go now. Otherwise, I'm going to be late." Dean said, "Not so fast. If you come to my place for the party, I'll give you $20. Randall wasn't sold. He frowned, saying, "Why would you do that?" David was running out of patience with Randall. He wanted his finder's fee, and Randall was not as easily persuaded. Finally, David burst out with, "Just take the damn money and join us, dude. Dean is a total party animal. The more the merrier is his motto. We'll phone the gas station and tell them you have a stomach bug or something like that." Dean said to Randall, "I'm giving you $20 for 2 reasons. To make up for your shift money, and because I like you, and I really want you to come to our party, okay?" Randall said, "Okay." While Randall was in the bathroom, Dean and David sorted out their business arrangement. Dean said, You're only getting $80 for this one. I did half the work, so I'm taking $100, and I am subtracting Randy's $20 from your half." David didn't protest. He took the money and took up the task of rolling joints. Randall walked into the lounge. The so-called party was underattended. Only Dean Corll and David Brooks were present for the festivities. Corll turned on the television. He cranked up the volume as far as it could go. Randall said, "When are the others coming?" "Soon." Corll grabbed a notepad and wrote at the top of the first page, "March 9th, party at Dean Corll's place." He gave the notepad to Randall. He said, "You have the honor of penning down the first entry into tonight's guest list. Write your name and a short message." Randall wrote, "Randall Harvey, first one to arrive at the party. Thanks, Dean." Dean gave Randall a $20 bill. He said, "Now I want to show you a party trick. When the other party goers arrive, you can play it on them." Randall pocketed the money. He accepted a joint and a beer from David. From there, Randall followed Dean into the bedroom. Dean Corll had Randall Harvey exactly where he wanted him, up against the torture board. Corll said, "I'm going to handcuff you to this board, but you don't need to worry. I will uncuff you right away. It's just to demonstrate the trick to you." Randall was too inebriated and high to object. Corll cuffed Randall's hands and feet to the board. His back was planted flat against the board. David Brooks amused himself in the lounge, watching television. Randall said to Dean Corll, "So what is the trick?" Dean opened a drawer from a bedside table. He pulled out a Polaroid camera. He adjusted the camera's perspective to get the perfect shot of Randall. "The trick is that you are now a prisoner. I can't remember where I put the keys to the handcuffs." Randall chuckled a little. Whether he truly believed it was a ruse or his laughter was born of denial, he was not in the mood for slavery. He said, "Good one, that will scare the others properly, all right." Corll took a few photos. "Fine, now that you have your trophy photo, you can let me loose, Dean." "You do not understand. I don't have the keys." "Come on, man, the joke is over." Randall tried to wriggle his way out of confinement. "Stop playing games, Dean. When are the others coming?" "They're not." "What do you mean?" Dean placed the photos on a table and approached Randall with menace. Randall was in a panic now. He shouted, "No! What the hell are you doing?" Dean was undressing. Randall cried out to David for assistance. David responded by turning up the volume on the television. Dean sodomized Randall. This rape and torture did not end like the others. Corll didn't strangle out every last breath from Randall's throat. Instead, Randall stared into the silencer of a .22 caliber pistol. He was weeping. The last sentence Randall Harvey heard before his untimely death was spoken by Dean Corll. That sentence was, "I have no further use for you." Randall was shot in his left eye. Corll went through Randall's pockets post-mortem. He took back the $20 he gave him. He kept an orange comb as a memento, stashing it with the Polaroids. Randall Harvey's body was stashed in the boat shed with the others. May 1971. Dean Corll's latest victims were David Heligiest and Mally Winkle. Corll had some history with Winkle. He worked at the candy factory, and his girlfriend was Randall Harvey's sister. This time Dean carried out his operation alone. David Brooks was out on a date with a girl. Corll spotted the boys walking down a sidewalk. They were only wearing swimming trunks. He couldn't resist. He stopped and said to them, "Hey there, on your way to the pool?" Mally recognized Dean. He turned to David and said, "David, this is the candy man I was always telling you about in elementary school." David mumbled, "Hello." Dean said, "Jump in, I'll give you a ride." About 200 yards before reaching the public pool, Dean Corll spotted an abandoned baseball field. He pulled over. He said to the boys, "There is something wrong with the engine. I just need to stop quickly to figure out what." Mally said, "It's all right, we can walk from here." Dean parked the van. He brought a tire iron out from under his seat. Before they knew what was coming, he smashed Mally's head with the tire iron. Mally was rendered unconscious. Dean had no use for Mally. He was familiar with him, and novelty was one of the things that kept him going. David Heligius was next on the chopping block. David began to scream, but Dean covered his mouth with his hand. He manhandled him into the back of the van. Corll drew the curtains shut. He pressed his knee into David's lower back with all his weight. He violated David while strangling him. He continued to choke him until the boy's body went limp. He brought Mally's body in back so he too could be strangled. Having exhausted all the power in his hands, he used an old electrical cord. He drove back to his apartment, where he listened to music for the rest of the afternoon. At 10 p.m., he drove the bodies to the boat storage shed. 10 weeks later, David Brooks was reading a newspaper when he came upon an article about David Heligius, which went, "Houston Heights. The parents of David Heligius, a 13-year-old boy who went missing at the end of May this year, have hired a private investigator to look for their son. According to the boy's mother, they weren't impressed with the way the local police was handling the situation. She was told her son was a runaway, and when she asked the police, 'How can someone be a runaway with only his bathing suit on and 80 cents in his pocket?' They dismissed her suggestion that it was a kidnapping and told her that a number of teenagers had been running away from their homes during the past 6 months. Mrs. Dorothy Heligius hired a private investigator who came up with a lead, suggesting that her son might have been abducted by a sexual offender called Chicken Joe, who apparently provides young male prostitutes to potential clients in and around the Houston Heights area. Mrs. Heligius and her husband, Fred, have since been spending time outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, a popular gay bar in the Montrose area, hoping to see David being taken in or out." The article mentioned that Elmer Wayne Henley, one of David Heligius' closest friends, was handing out flyers offering a reward to anybody who could provide information about Heligius' status and whereabouts. David Brooks had known Elmer Henley. He was a friend from high school. Brooks had been struggling to find new boys for Dean Corll. He saw no harm in luring his old friends into the death trap. It was a Tuesday night, and David Brooks knew that Henley went to the movies every Tuesday evening, since it was half price for students. When the movie let out, Reuben Haney, a friend of Wayne Henley's, came out. Wayne Henley was not there, but David Brooks invited Haney to come to Dean Corll's place to party. It couldn't have worked out better for Dean Corll. Reuben said he would need to spend the night. Dean Corll procured 2 LSD capsules that afternoon. He couldn't wait to test them on somebody other than himself. He was ecstatic when David walked in the apartment with a new victim. After getting acquainted, Dean handed everybody a beer. He spiked Rubens with the 2 LSD capsules. Rubens said, "Thanks. Nice place you've got here." He sat on a couch. "Tell me something. When are the girls coming?" David Brooks led him to believe that Dean hired 4 call girls to entertain the men. Dean said, "They should be here any minute now. Let's drink in the meantime. The first one to finish his beer earns the right to choose a girl first." Reuben chugged. The beer and the acid hit his immune system in 7 seconds flat. Corll didn't want to wait for the effects of the LSD to take hold. So he opened 2 more beers and spiked Rubens with 2 more capsules of acid. 15 minutes later, Reuben was out cold. Nothing Dean or David did could rouse him. David said, "What is wrong with him? He cannot be out cold from 2 beers, man." Dean stood back. He bit his lower lip. He said, "I think I gave him too much acid." David panicked now. "You gave him acid? Fuck, Dean. What if he's overdosed? We need to get him to a doctor, damn it." Nothing could have persuaded Dean Corll to deviate from his present course. "Nope, he'll come around. But first I'm going to have a little fun with him." David was too sober to witness another production of Dean Corll's Theater of the Macabre. He said, "You're on your own. I'm out of here." It was quite a display of moral posturing coming from the guy who recruited victims for Corll and even watched them be tortured and killed. Dean gave him his $200 finder's fee before he left, so David Brooks got what he cared about. Corll was not happy about the results he was getting from Reuben Haney. If he hadn't administered a dosage of lysergic acid potent enough to get 4 people tripping, Haney might have been more responsive. Dean's frustration grew as he hit Reuben on the buttocks and lower back with a baseball bat, with no reflexive action whatsoever. Eventually, Corll got bored with it all. He strangled Reuben to death, with the reaction in Haney's body being almost as uneventful as its reaction to the torture while he was still in the pink. Dean brought the corpse to the boat shed. September 1971. One morning, David Brooks brought his friend Wayne Henley to experience Dean Corll's idea of hospitality. "Have a seat," Corll said to Wayne. Dean was smoking a joint. Henley sat down. Corll said, "So what's your story?" Wayne lit a cigarette and said, "What do you mean, my story? That stuff will kill you, you know." "Says you. You're smoking much more dangerous stuff right there, man." "Marijuana is medicinal." Dean liked Wayne's cocky and no-nonsense, abrasive disposition. He was so impressed with him, he decided not to grind him through the victim machine. David Brooks had gotten serious with his girlfriend and wasn't coming through with his mandate to bring more fresh flesh for Dean Corll to slaughter. Corll needed a new accomplice. He said to Wayne, "I have a proposition for you." "What?" "How would you like to earn some extra cash?" "Depends on how much cash we are talking about." "A lot. There is this homosexual slavery ring that operates from Dallas to California. These guys pay very well for teenage boys. For every runaway boy between the age of 13 and 18 you bring to my apartment, I will pay you $200. "Fuck me." David glared at Dean. He was watching his livelihood swirl down the drain. Dean said to Wayne, Ask David. He's earned his fair share of money already. What do they do to the boys? I'm not exactly sure. That's not the point, however. The point is that some of the youngsters here in Houston are up to no good. They steal and plunder and blemish walls with graffiti. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that selling them to the ring will get rid of the problem. But these boys are no loss to our society. Most of them are a burden to their parents anyway. Wayne stubbed out his cigarette. He was taking this in. About 30 seconds later, he said, "Let me think about it." February 9th, 1972. After 4 months of deliberation, Wayne Henley walked into Dean Corll's apartment with a 17-year-old boy in tow. He introduced him by saying, "This is Rusty from the Oak Forest District." The boy's real name was Willard Branch Jr., but everybody called him Rusty because he was a ginger. Unknown to both Dean and Wayne at the time, Rusty's father, Willard Branch Sr., was a prominent and high-ranking officer with the Houston Police Department. When Rusty was out of earshot, Corll asked Wayne what convinced him to become his new recruiter. Wayne said, "Financial trouble," as he stared at the floor. Rusty approached Wayne and said, "What's going on, Wayne? You said we were going to smoke some pot here." "In a moment." He turned to Corll. "My reward?" Rusty grew anxious after hearing this. What reward? What's going on here? Wayne's indiscretion was about to throw a monkey wrench into this whole operation. Dean had to improvise a quick solution to get it back on track. He said to Rusty, "Walk with me. There is a reward for you, too." Dean led the boys to his bedroom. Rusty took in the torture board. He said, "What's that for?" Dean pressed a cloth soaked in formaldehyde on his face. He pushed him up against the torture board. Rusty passed out after 30 seconds. Dean turned to Wayne and said, "It's just to transport him to Dallas in my van." As much a mercenary as David Brooks, Wayne said, "You do what you must. I only want my reward." Dean gave him the money and said, "Thanks, you did well." Wayne pocketed the money as he took in Rusty's inanimate body propped up against the board. He shook his head. "I have a better way to do that, Dean. I'll show you next time. Right now, I have to go, okay? Need to pay some debts and stuff." With that, he left Corll's apartment. It had been nearly 6 months since Dean Corll's last torture and kill. He couldn't contain his excitement any longer. He slammed the door shut. He ripped his clothes off with reckless abandon. Rusty was dead 14 minutes later. After having his way with Rusty's body, he castrated him with a hunting knife. He capped it all off by shooting Rusty in the head with his pistol. It was on this day that Dean Corll made peace with his realization that he was a psychopath and a serial killer. March 24th, 1972. Dean Corll had moved to another apartment, and he was throwing a housewarming party. He invited 2 guests, Wayne Henley and David Brooks. Wayne had another agenda for the night. He asked Dean if he could borrow his van to pick up another guest. He went to a Long John Silver restaurant where his friend Frank Aguirre was working as a waiter. His friend Wayne was waiting outside when he left the restaurant. Wayne said, "Your mom picking you up?" "Nope, I called a cab. I'm going to Rhonda's." Wayne said, "Let me save you the cab fare, Frank. I'll drive you to your girlfriend's house." Frank welcomed this. When he got into the van, Wayne handed him a beer. He said to Frank, "We're going to a housewarming party first." "That's cool with me." When Wayne and Frank walked into Dean's apartment, Corll and Brooks were inebriated. Slurring his words, Dean said to Wayne, "What took you so long?" When he saw Frank behind Wayne, he sat upright. "Ah, I see." Wayne introduced Frank to Dean, and after a tour of Dean's new townhouse, they resumed their party outdoors. After drinking beer and smoking a couple of joints, Frank decided it was time to pack it in for the night. He said to Wayne, "Will you drive me to Rhonda's place now?" Wayne started laughing. "Wait, Frank, you haven't played the handcuff game with us yet." "The handcuff game? I'll show you." Wayne stood and went inside. David Brooks interjected with, "It's a good one." A minute later, Wayne Henley returned to the garden. He was holding 2 sets of stainless steel handcuffs and a dirty old beige blanket. He said, "Check this out." He sat on the lawn. He cuffed his wrists and ankles together. His wrists were behind his back. The others watched as he pulled the blanket over his body. A few seconds later, he jumped up from underneath the blanket, his hands and feet freed from the cuffs. Frank was impressed. He said, "Holy shit, you're like Harry Houdini. How the hell did you do that?" "Sleight of the hand beats the eye. Come here, and I'll let you in on the secret." Frank let Wayne cuff him in the same way. He awaited instructions on how to free himself. They were not forthcoming. Wayne Henley opened another beer. He took a seat in one of Dean's bamboo patio chairs, so he was comfortable. He said to Frank, "I suggest you prepare yourself for a trip to California, buddy." He laughed. Dean stood and grabbed Frank by the collar of his shirt. Frank began shouting for help. Dean pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and stuffed it into Frank's mouth. He dragged him into the house. David turned to Wayne. "How did you do that?" Wayne lifted his shirt. The handcuff keys were hanging from his belt buckle. They started to chuckle when they began to hear strange sounds coming from within the house. It sounded like someone was gargling. Wayne said, "What is Dean doing to him in there?" His tonality grave, David said, "He is strangling him to death while having his way with him." "What? Are you serious?" "There is no sexual slavery ring, Wayne. Dean is using the boys for himself. Then he kills them." "How do you know that?" "I've seen it with my own eyes, man." Wayne jumped up and ran into the house. He banged on the bedroom door with his fists. He shouted, "Dean, stop it! I want you to let him go. He is my friend." David Brooks joined him, almost making an appeal to Dean to grant mercy to Frank, which would have been out of character by then. The gargling sounds continued as Wayne and David rapped on the door and appealed for Corll's clemency. After a few minutes, Corll opened the door. He was half naked and short of breath. He said to the boys, "You two are going to help me get rid of the body. Wayne, unlock the cuffs. I'm going to fetch the lime and the sheets." Wayne Henley was mortified when he saw the corpse of Frank Aguirre lying on the floor. The gag was still in his mouth. His bulging eyes were white after having rolled up into his head. His neck was a tapestry of purplish-black bruising. A nylon rope noose was tied around his neck. Wayne was so shocked he went to the toilet to vomit. He removed the cuffs from Frank's body, now covered in lime. Dean and David rolled it up in transparent plastic sheets. As Wayne watched, he said, "Is this what you did to Rusty as well?" "I'm afraid so." Corll was cold as ice. Wayne helped Dean and David load Frank's remains into a wooden box. Its dimensions were roughly the same as 2 coffins. They loaded it into the van. They drove it to High Island Beach. There were too many corpses in the boat shed. Dean said he would have to rearrange some items in that facility before he could stuff more corpses inside. Frank Aguirre's burial plot on High Island Beach was close to that of Dean Corll's first victim, Jeffrey Conan. April 20th, 1972. Wayne Henley may have been shocked by the murder of Frank Aguirre, but not shocked enough to report Dean Corll to the authorities. Wayne brought his friend Mark Scott to Corll's house. Mark was 17 years old with blonde hair and blue eyes. Dean loved this type. In fact, Corll commented on this when they were introduced. "You're such a pretty young man." Pretty, but tough. Mark punctuated this by swallowing the last gulp of his third beer, burping loudly, and crushing the can between his hands. To supplement this tough guy act, he said, "I've been in jail once, you know." David said, "What for?" He lit a match and passed it to Wayne. Mark cracked another beer. "Carrying a prohibited knife in public." Dean said, "So what's prohibited about a knife?" "This knife was a hunting knife, and I was only 14 years old at the time." Dean turned off the stereo and the television. He said to Mark, "Let's see how good you are with our handcuff game then." "Show him, Wayne." Wayne demonstrated the same trick he showed to Frank Aguirre, except his hands were cuffed in front of his body this time. Dean said, "We will show you how to free yourself if you write a postcard for us." "A postcard?" Dean handed a postcard bearing a photo of Austin, along with a pen, to Mark. He said, "I'll dictate it to you, smartass." "I'm not writing no damn postcard. Let me loose or else." "Or else what?" Wayne played along. "You think you're calling the shots here, huh?" "I refuse." Wayne hunched down and said, "Listen to me, you..." Mark shoved his bound hands underneath his windbreaker. He pulled out a medium-sized hunting knife. He brandished it, slashing at Corll. He cut his shirt and made a gash on his arm. David shrieked. Wayne ran to the front door and grabbed Dean's pistol from behind it. Mark tried to stab Dean again, but Wayne came over and pointed the gun at him. He said, "If you don't drop that knife right now, I'm going to shoot you in the fucking face." Mark quivered. He threw his knife aside. He said, "I'm sorry, Wayne. Please don't shoot. I will write the postcard, I promise." Dean had a look at Mark's handiwork. The cut was superficial, little more than a scratch. But he was apoplectic about the damage to the cotton shirt he was wearing. It was expensive. He managed to place his anger in reserve for a moment. He sat on the coffee table. He said, "All right, Mark, let us begin." "What must I write?" "Dear Mom and Dad, how are you doing? I'm in Austin for a couple of days. I found a good job. I'm making $3 an hour. I'll be home when I have enough money. Love, Mark." Mark was instructed to finish by writing his address. Dean said, "Well done." He slammed the postcard on the table. He pulled a nylon cord out from beneath the table and started choking Mark with it. Mark started kicking him as much as he could with his cuffed feet. Wayne leapt onto him. He pinned his legs to the floor. David Brooks just watched. After a few minutes of this, Mark Scott was dead. May 1972. Dean Corll and David Brooks were sitting in Corll's van. They were observing two teenage boys David considered to be potential victims for Dean. Brooks said, "Geez, Dean, you're becoming like the Pied Piper, man." "The Pied what?" David responded with a smirk. "The Pied Piper of Hamelin. Are you telling me you've never heard of him?" "Can't say that it rings a bell." "Well, it goes like this. There's this little town in Germany called Hamelin. Now, a long time ago there was a rat infestation there, and nobody could get rid of the damn rodents. Then, one day, this dude with multicolored clothes walked into town and pulled out this magic flute, and which was incidentally called a pipe back then. When he started playing his pipe, the rats began to follow him, see? Then the mayor promised him 1,000 guilders to get rid of the rats. So he agreed and lured all those hundreds of rats into the river on the edge of town. The only conundrum was that the mayor never paid the guy, see? So the Pied Piper lost his shit and started playing another tune on his flute pipe. This time, the music caused all the town's children to follow him, and he lured them into a cave up on the hill. More than 130 kids went missing that day, never to be seen again." Dean said, "I guess I can see the similarity, but it's a stupid story. Where did you hear it anyway?" "I can't remember exactly where I heard it the first time, but I always used to tell it to the other kids while playing pool at your mama's candy factory." David's girlfriend was away on a lengthy vacation, which freed up David to make more money recruiting boys for Dean Corll. The competition between him and Wayne Henley was fierce. The two boys they were watching came along. Their names were Billy Balk and Johnny Delhomme. After exchanging greetings and small talk, David said, "Listen, we're going back to Dean's house to smoke some weed and watch the Carol Burnett show. Want to come with?" The boys could not resist the offer of free weed, so they climbed into the van. Corll raped and tortured Billy and Johnny for almost 2 hours. Wayne, having felt left out, knocked on the door. He said, "Dean, let me in, man. I want to see what you're doing." After participating in the torture and murder of Mark Scott, Wayne became more and more sadistic. He was curious about the entire process. He even wanted to be involved in the executions. He felt Dean was being selfish by having the boys all to himself. A few seconds later, Wayne walked through the door. Corll was smoking a joint in an armchair in a corner. The boys were tied to the bed with nylon ropes. Their mouths were gagged with underwear. The underwear was fastened to their faces with duct tape. Corll and the two boys were naked. Wayne said, "Are you going to kill them too?" "Unless you want to do it." "I'd rather watch you do it." Johnny made a grunting noise. He started wriggling around on the bed. Billy was crying. Dean said, "You know, Wayne, you are already an accomplice to murder. If someone finds out what happened to Mark Scott, you're going to jail with me, my friend. So, why don't you just do these two and get it over with?" Dean grabbed his pistol. "Or are you too scared?" Wayne said, "I'm not scared. Give me the gun." Wayne pointed the gun at Billy's torso. After holding it in that position for about 30 seconds, he lowered it and said, "I'd rather strangle him, like you did when you killed Mark the other night." Dean said, "Good. Do you have more rope? Just use your hands. Knock the wind out of him first, then it's much easier." Wayne tucked the gun into his waistband. He straddled Billy, who was pinned on his back. He punched him in the stomach as hard as he could. Billy gasped. He tightened his hands around Billy's neck and started to squeeze. Dean watched, thrilled with what he was seeing. It was Wayne's first strangulation, and it was more work and time than he expected. While he was choking Billy to death, he pulled out the gun and stuck it in Johnny's face. He said, "Hey, Johnny!" He shot Johnny in the nose. The bullet tore through Johnny's brain and made an exit through his left ear. His blood was splattered all over the bed's headboard. The smell of cordite and iron permeated the air. Dean was impressed. He said, "Fucking hell. You just killed 2 guys at the same time, Wayne." July 18th. Dean Corll spent the night in the boat shed rearranging the corpses, which were decomposing in earnest, and the stench was unendurable. He had to make room in the boat shed because he, David, and Wayne almost got caught burying Billy and Johnny at High Island Beach. He called in sick to work that day. He spent most of the day sleeping. He never forgot the smell of the rotting corpses, though. He had to get up from his slumber 3 times to vomit. That night, David and Wayne brought a guest to Dean's place named Stephen Kent Sickman. They got settled in a lounge watching the movie A Clockwork Orange on the television. At one point, Stephen complained about the lack of air conditioning. It was a typical Texas summer night, and he was sweating profusely. He removed his sleeveless shirt. Dean Corll liked what he saw. Suddenly his interest in the movie waned. He said, "Steve, come with me, will you? I want to show you something interesting." Moments later, Dean made sexual advances towards Stephen. Stephen was having none of it. He punched Corll in the face. Corll was enraged. He grabbed Stephen and wrestled him over to the torture board. He handcuffed him to it. He pulled out a baseball bat he kept in a bamboo basket beside the bed. He hammered Stephen's torso with a bat repeatedly. He broke his hip bone and 6 of his ribs. The pain was more than he could endure, and Stephen cried out in agony. He begged Dean to stop. His pleas were drowned out by the television. Corll strangled Stephen to death with a nylon cord. He tied him up in plastic sheeting and loaded him into the van. He took him to the boat shed. About a month later, Roy Bunton was on his way to the shoe store where he worked. He was offered a ride by Wayne Henley in Dean Corll's van. He was a trusting sort, so he got in. Roy was abducted in Corll's customary way. He withstood a marathon of rape and torture on Dean Corll's torture board for 4 days. Dean Corll finished him off with 4 gunshots to the head. October 2nd, 1972. Wally J. Simino and his friend Richie Hembry were walking home after seeing a movie. They turned onto Yale Street and were impressed by a green Corvette that was parked next to the sidewalk. They edged closer to have a more in-depth look at the car when a man leaned out of it. He said, "Hey dudes, my name is Dave Brooks. Where are you off to?" They told him where they lived, and Brooks said, "Jump in, I'll give you a ride." After some small talk and a minute of silence, David Brooks said, "Listen guys, we just have to stop by my friend's house quickly. I need to pick up some paint for tonight's party." Wally said, "What do you need paint for at a party?" David frowned like this was the craziest thing he'd ever heard. "You've never sniffed paint before? It's great, let me tell you. Even better than beer or weed. You should try it. My friend works for the power company, so he has access to all kinds of paint and thinners. You can have some when we get to his place." Richie said that he sniffed paint the previous year. He reassured Wally that he could get high from it. As David walked through Dean's door, followed by Richie and Wally, he said to Corll, "New delivery." Wally and Richie were looking forward to huffing paint so much it didn't occur to them that what David said had ominous implications. The boys were younger than many of the others David and Wayne brought to his house, and he was pleased. He said to them, "Please sit down. Make yourselves comfortable. Beer?" Richie said, "Yeah, and paint." David said to Dean as he was making his way to the kitchen, "Where's Wayne?" "He's on his way back from Dallas. He should probably be back here at 10 or 11. Wally discovered Dean's telephone. He dialed his house's number. His mother said, "Hello, this is Mrs. Simoneau speaking." Wally said, "Mama." The line went dead. David shouted at Wally, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He pulled the phone cord out of the socket. Wally started to cry. I'm sorry, Dave." Dean said, "What is going on here?" David Brooks made fists. "This little shit just phoned his mother." "Did he tell her he's here at Westcott?" "No, I stopped him in time." "Well, then there's no harm, is there?" Dean smiled. "Now remember, guys, this is a secret party right here. No telling, okay? What happens in the Westcott Towers stays in the Westcott Towers." Richie laughed nervously. Wally's eyes were bugging out. Dean handed out beers to everybody. While the boys drank, Corll went to his bedroom. He brought back a can of white acrylic paint and a bottle of thinner. While Dean and David smoked pot, Wally and Richie huffed thinner and paint. They augmented their intoxication with 3 beers each. 2 hours later, Wally and Richie were passed out on the couch. Dean carried them to his bedroom. He tied them to the torture rack and gagged them. He molested them for 90 minutes. Soon after, Wayne Henley showed up. Dean, David, and Wayne left the boys bound to the torture board and locked up the bedroom when they went out to a nightclub. The next day, Wayne was the first one to wake. He went into the bedroom to check up on the victims. He brought Dean's gun with him. When he entered, he discovered to his horror that Richie managed to wriggle his feet free of the ropes. Wayne pointed the gun at him. It went off accidentally, and Richie was shot in the side of his mouth. Dean came running into the room seconds later. Though a silencer was attached to the gun, the shot was loud enough to be heard by everybody in the apartment. The room was splattered with blood. Dean said, "What have you done, Wayne? He's not dead, asshole." Dean Corll may have been a sadistic rapist, pederast, and psychopathic serial killer, but he was an exceptional housekeeper, and he wanted his dirty deeds done with minimal mess to clean up in the aftermath. Dean wanted the boy's death handled right, and realized he was better off doing it himself. He grabbed a nylon rope and strangled blood-speckled Richie Hembry in under 4 minutes. He did the same with Wally Simoneau. Once he had extinguished the last remnants of life out of Wally, he glared at Wayne. He said, "You're such an unprofessional, you know." With his latest victims freshly strangled and lying at his feet, Corll shook his head at Wayne's performance. He had not demonstrated the industry standard. They did observe the customary protocols when they disposed of the bodies in the boat shed. November 15th, Dean raped, tortured, and killed 19-year-old Richard Kepner. He did it without assistance from David and Wayne. That evening he watched a televised address by the Pope. An excerpt from that speech. The evil which exists in the world is the result and an effect of the attack upon us and our society by a dark and hostile agent, the devil. Evil is not only a privation, but a living, spiritual, corrupt, and corrupting being. Having taken this in, Dean Corll decided that he was not accountable for the heinous crimes he had been committing. Feeling that Satan was to blame, he told himself, "You're going to be okay, Dean Corll. You don't have a dark soul. Satan has one. It's not you. It's the fucking devil making you do these evil things. Let him burn in hell, the bastard." February 1973. Dean Corll had moved again, and he was cleaning the garden and back when he heard the doorbell ring. He opened the door and encountered a teenage boy that looked vaguely familiar to him. The boy said, "Hi there, Mr. Corll." After running a memory check, Corll said, "Joseph, right?" He met him once when he visited David's mother's house. "Joseph, yes, Joseph Lyles." "Where's Dave?" "His mom said he's with you. She gave me the address." "His girlfriend is back from vacation. He took her to a picnic at Memorial Park, but he should be back here at around 2 o'clock. "Oh, all right, I'll be going then." As Joseph was turning to leave, Dean grabbed his sleeve. He said, "Wait, why don't you come in for a beer? It's almost 1:45. David will be back in just over an hour." "What the heck? I have nothing else to do anyway. The skating rink at the mall is under construction." Dean took Joseph to the backyard. They sat on a bench drinking their beers. At one point, Dean said, "Listen, Joseph, have you ever tried it with another man?" "Tried what?" "You know." Corll put his beer down between his feet. He pinched Joseph's cheek with his thumb and index finger until Joseph bit his hand. Dean shouted, "Ouch!" He punched Joseph on his cheekbone. He heard a crackle noise when his fist made contact. Joseph's head swung sideways. He screamed from the excruciating pain. Before he could come to his senses, Corll hit him again between his temple and eardrum. There was a tree behind him, and when Joseph's head flew back against it, the force was so intense it was enough to split his skull open. Joseph's eyeballs rolled back in their sockets. The lids closed. His chin fell to his chest. His arms went limp, and the can of beer fell to the ground. David Brooks showed up at Dean Corll's apartment at 4 p.m. He had a look at Joseph Lyles' body wrapped in plastic sheeting, tied with rope and sealed with duct tape. David said to Dean, "You found one by yourself?" "Yeah, but I couldn't have any fun with this one. The punk bit me." David was outraged that the victim would dare to fight back against his tormentor. "The scumbag! What was his name?" "I'll tell you all about it later. I have taken a Polaroid picture of him. But first we need to put him away." "In the boat shed?" "No, this one doesn't deserve to be buried in the shed. He's going to Jefferson County Beach." June 4th. Dean Corll moved yet again, this time to a house owned by his father. Wayne brought a young man to Corll. He said, "Dean, this is Billy Ray Lawrence. Billy, this is Dean Corll." Billy Ray, 15 years old, walked in and said, "Wow, this is such a cozy little house." Dean said, "Are you staying over?" Billy was wearing a Boy Scout uniform. He untucked his shirt and said, "I don't know, should I?" "We're going fishing tomorrow at Lake Sam Rayburn. Do you want to come with?" I will have to phone my dad first. Billy Ray called his father and told him he was going on a fishing trip with some friends. After taking Billy Ray on a tour of the house, they returned to the lounge, where Dean gave Wayne and Billy Ray LSD capsules, which they swallowed with vodka and 7-Up. After making small talk with Corll, Billy Ray turned to Wayne and said, "This is good stuff right here. Is there more?" "Of course." Wayne gave Billy Ray a refill. 20 minutes later, Wayne passed out from the LSD. Billy Ray said, "What's wrong with him?" Billy Ray was concerned about this state of events because his eyelids were also growing heavy. Before Dean could answer his question, Billy Ray passed out, falling forward and landing face first on the carpet. He was out cold. When Billy Ray woke in the morning, he was shocked to find himself tied to the bed in the master bedroom. He was flat on his stomach, as he had been when he passed out. He was naked. He had cotton mouth. He was bound with hemp rope, and the coarse texture was cutting into his wrists and ankles. The door was closed. The curtains were drawn. It was hot. It was humid. He didn't know the time. Desperate for clemency, he said, "Hello, is anybody there?" Silence. Billy Ray struggled to free himself, but this only led to more friction burns from the rope. The pungent miasma of urine was a blight on the atmosphere. He had soiled himself and the bed. "Hello, Dean, Wayne, anybody?" Silence. Panic turned to weeping. Billy Ray had been conscious and isolated in the bedroom for 7 hours when Dean Corll returned at 5 p.m. When he heard the door to the bedroom open, he said to Corll, "Dean, why did you tie me up? I am in pain and I'm thirsty." His head dropped and he cried some more. Corll helped Billy Ray drink a glass of water. He wasn't exactly in a merciful mood, though, or at least that wasn't reflected in the next thing he did to Billy Ray. Naughty, needy Billy Ray. Look at you all tied up and begging. I guess the next thing you're going to tell me is that you're hungry, isn't it? Billy Ray said nothing. Dean placed an aluminum toolbox on the floor. He sat down on a corner of the bed that hadn't been soiled. He said, "Are you left-handed or right-handed?" "Right-handed." "All right, I'm going to untie your right hand now. After you have performed a simple task for me, I will let you go." Corll emancipated Billy Ray's right hand. He handed him a postcard, pen, and a sheet of paper, all from the toolbox. He said, "I want you to copy everything that I've written on this piece of paper exactly like that onto the postcard. Do you understand?" Billy Ray complied. "Don't try to do anything stupid now. I assume you know all about postcards with your daddy working in the Houston Post mailroom and all that?" This is the message Dean Corll dictated to Billy Ray Lawrence. "Dear Daddy, I have decided to go to Austin because I have a good job offer. I am sorry that I decided to leave, but I just had to go. I will be back in late August. Hope you understand, but I had to go. Daddy, I hope you know I love you. Your son, Billy Ray." Corll said, "Good boy." After taking back the postcard and pen from Billy, he tied his right hand back to the bedpost. Billy said, "Wait, you said you were going to release me." Corll sneered. He said, "I lied, you dumbass." Billy Ray Lawrence was kept alive for 3 more days of torture. When Dean wasn't inflicting excruciating pain on Billy with his tools, he was raping him. He didn't feed him and only gave him 2 glasses of water a day. The 3rd evening marked the return of Wayne Henley. He said, Why are you still keeping him alive? It's getting smelly in that room, you know. Because I like him, Wayne. He's been a lot of fun. But you're right. It is time to let go. When are you going to kill him? Tonight. I had a telephone conversation with my mother this afternoon, and she informed me that my stepfather is flying to Europe early tomorrow morning. That means he will not be able to visit his log cabin at Lake Sam Rayburn. I still have a key to the place, so we're going fishing, and we'll get rid of the body while we're there. Enter David Brooks. Corll said, "Ah, the groom-to-be. What are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be with your fiancée somewhere?" I spoke to Wayne on the phone, and he said you had a boy here. Where is he? In my room. Go check for yourself. David was disgusted when he had a look at what remained of Billy Ray Lawrence. Billy's epidermis was an ornamental paradigm of the grotesque, with bruises, welts, scratches, and superficial cuts from head to toe. After waking the following morning, David was informed that Dean and Wayne strangled Billy to death and placed him in a wooden box. This came as a relief. The torment Corll inflicted on the boy was routine by this point, but it was no less disturbing to anybody even marginally less a monster than Dean. Nevertheless, he did assist Wayne and Corll when they drove the body to Lake Sam Rayburn. After their arrival, Corll gave fishing provisions to David and Wayne. He wanted to hunt for a site to bury the body. As David and Wayne searched for a place to cast their lines, David said of Corll, "I can't believe he is so casual about getting rid of the body. Dean's always been like that. Something's not right in his head. Why do you think he tortures the guys we bring him like that? I mean, I can understand his sexual desires, but why hurt them? I think I know the reason why. One evening last year, when Dean was quite stoned, he told me about his year in the army. Apparently there were some guys who found out that he was a homosexual, and they beat him up badly for it. I think that might have scarred his emotions, and now he takes it out on the boys we supply to him." When David and Wayne returned to the cabin, they were dumbfounded when they observed Corll cooking pork ribs on a barbecue. He was whistling the Beatles song Piggies. David said, "What the hell, Dean? There is a dead body in the van and you're making food? Fucking incredible. Can't work on an empty belly. Besides, it's not dark yet. People might see us. How about, thank you for making us something to eat, Dean? You know, you've been sponging on me for years, and you never show any gratitude." David went inside to take a shower. Wayne stayed out and kept Corll company on the porch. He said to Corll, "It actually makes sense. I don't know why Dave went off like that. I take it you didn't catch anything." "Nope. This lake is dead. I tell you, just like old Billy Ray over there." They found a spot to bury Billy that night. June 15th. 20-year-old construction worker Raymond Blackburn was in a festive mood. His child had just been born. He was thumbing a ride to Louisiana so he could see his baby for the first time. He was picked up by Dean Corll and died without seeing his newly born baby. July 7th, 1973. Wayne brought 15-year-old Homer Garcia to Dean's house. They spent the first portion of the evening drinking, smoking marijuana, and setting off fireworks. Homer spent most of his life living in poverty, so this was the greatest party he had ever attended, and he enthusiastically indicated this to Corll. Homer was about ready to pass out. He fell on the lounge and landed against a wooden box. He said to Wayne, "What's this crate for?" "You're going to like it a lot. Just wait and see, buddy." Wayne walked down the corridor and returned with handcuffs in hand. He handed them to Homer, lifted the lid off the box, and turned his back to him. He said, "First, cuff my hands behind my back, then cuff my ankles together." After Homer figured out how to work the cuffs, he bound Wayne's wrists together. Wayne got in the box, and Homer closed the lid. Wayne emerged from the box a few seconds later. Homer clapped enthusiastically. He said, "How on earth did you manage to do that?" "Let me show you." 40 minutes later, Homer was suffering excruciating pain. He was begging for his life to be spared. He was standing in the bathroom. Blood was streaming down his chest. Dean shot him at close range in his right lung. Homer said, "Please don't kill me. I need a doctor." There were bruises all over Homer's body from when Dean and Wayne struck him with blunt objects for 30 minutes. Dean Corll raised his pistol and aimed it at Homer Garcia's head. Wayne Henley was standing behind him. He said, "Finish him off, man." Homer said, "Please." Corll's response, "A shot to the head." July 12th. Corll said to David and Wayne, "Let's take a drive around the lake. I need another boy." They were in luck. A young man named John Sellers needed a ride because his car was stuck. They drove on until they reached the spot where Dean and his goons buried so many of Corll's victims. Dean was ashen. He said, "Shit, I think there was something sticking out." That something was a foot. David got out and covered the foot with gravel. It suddenly occurred to Corll that John Sellers probably saw the foot. He got out of the van, went around back, took up his rifle, and told David to get out of the way. He shot John Sellers in the chest 4 times. 1 week later, Dean Corll and Wayne Henley murdered 15-year-old Tony Balk. He was promised money and free beer if he accompanied Wayne and Dean in Corll's van. 4 hours later, after being repeatedly beaten and raped, Tony Balk was strangled to death with an electrical cable and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. Tony Balk was Dean Corll's 25th victim. Less than a week later, Wayne Henley made another $400. Charles Cobble was an old classmate, and Marty Jones was a friend of Charles. When Wayne mentioned Dean Corll, Marty said, "Oh yeah, I know of him. He was the candy man when we were still in elementary school." Wayne invited the boys to party with him at Corll's home, telling them there would be plenty of marijuana and beer to go around. Hours later, Wayne demonstrated the handcuff trick. When he cuffed Charles and Marty, he told them he lost the keys. Dean said, "They both look pretty strong, Wayne. Let's find out who the better fighter is, shall we?" They dragged the boys to the master bedroom. Wayne held them down. Dean uncuffed, then recuffed their left wrists and left ankles to opposite sides of the torture board. Dean said to Marty, "Now punch Charlie in the face." Marty refused, instead screaming for help to anyone in the outside world who was unlikely to be listening. During these murder fests, Wayne or David always cranked up the stereo or television to drown out all other sound. Wayne taped their mouths shut with black duct tape. Dean lashed them with a rubber whip. Charlie and Marty started punching and kicking each other in hopes that it would elicit mercy in Corll and he would stop whipping them. Tears were streaming down their faces. Dean put the whip down. He said, "Good. Let me make you a deal. The first one to knock the other one unconscious, I will let go." Charles and Marty fought for the next 6 minutes, until they were exhausted and could swing no more. Dean got up from his bed and removed his clothes. Wayne watched dispassionately as Dean raped Charles. After Dean finished, he returned to the bed and said, "Now shoot the fucker." Wayne shot Charles twice in the back of his head. A salad of blood and brain particles burst into the air as Charles' body fell limp against the torture board. Marty was shaking his head, his screams muffled beneath the duct tape. Dean shouted at Wayne, "The other one too!" Wayne pulled the trigger, but this time there was only a click. He said, "It's out of bullets." Dean forgot to buy cartridges for his gun. With that option off the table, he leapt onto Marty Jones and strangled him to death under 2 minutes. August 3rd, 13-year-old James Dremala was raising money to take a girl out on a date. He gathered pop bottles to take in for deposit money on his bike. Though his mother didn't want him riding his bicycle after dark, he persuaded her he would make it through. As James was approaching the grocery store where he would take the bottles, a white van stopped in front of him. An older boy climbed out. "Hi there, young man. My name is Dave Brooks. What are you doing alone out in the streets after dark?" "None of your business." James turned his steering wheel to the right. David heard the empty bottles clanking together in the bag. He said, "Ah, you're returning empties, right? Well, in that case, I have a surprise for you." "What is it?" "See this van? The man it belongs to is one of my close friends, and he has a whole garage full of empty Coke bottles. Just the other day he was complaining about how he doesn't have the energy to take them all to the store." "Wow. You think he would let me take them?" "I know he will. Jimmy. You can call me Jimmy." "Well, Jimmy, why don't you go down to the store really quickly and return those bottles in your backpack? I will wait here, and then we'll take you to the house with all the Coca-Cola empties. It's not too far from here." James went to the grocery store while David, Wayne, and Dean waited at the van. In the grocery store, Jimmy got the $3 for the bottles and asked a clerk if he could use a telephone. He called home. His father answered. Jimmy said, "Daddy, will you please tell Mama that I'm running a little late? I just need to make one more stop before I come home." "You listen to me, James Dremala. You get your butt back to the house now. Do you hear me? You are not too old for hiding." "Okay, Daddy, I'll be back home in 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, James Dremala was cuffed to Dean Corll's torture board. After being beaten and molested, Corll strangled him to death with a nylon cord. August 7th. Wayne Henley's friends Timothy Curley, 19, and Rhonda Williams, 15, were brought to Dean Corll's place after Rhonda was physically abused by her drunken father. Wayne soothed her nerves with Pink Floyd music and bagging, which was the code word Wayne used at that juncture for inhaling the fumes of paint and solvents. Once she got high, she felt much better. Dean arrived after 2 a.m. He had been at a party and was intoxicated. Wayne introduced him to Timothy and Rhonda. He was not pleased to meet them. He said to Wayne once he was out of earshot, "Can we have a word in private?" They adjourned to the kitchen. Wayne said, "What's wrong?" "Where the hell's David?" "He's at home with his wife." Dean pushed Wayne up against the refrigerator. "What the fuck do you think you're doing bringing a girl in here?" "Forgive me, Dean, it's just her father was drunk and he was beating her. We just had to get her out of there, man. Now please lower your voice. I'm sure we can work something out. You know how I despise women. You've ruined everything, Wayne. I want boys here, not whores. And that Tim buddy of yours in there is too old. I want young ones, like that Dremala boy who was looking for empty bottles in the garage the other night." Dean stood back, releasing Wayne from his grip. I've had a long night, so I'm going to bed now. When I wake up, the other two better be gone. Are we clear? Yes, Dean. Can we at least finish our drinks before they leave? We won't make a lot of noise, I promise. You do whatever you want to, but when I wake up tomorrow morning and find them still in my house, there's going to be trouble. I have to go to work early, all right? Wayne, Rhonda, and Timothy continued drinking. At one point, Rhonda said to Wayne, "What does Dean do for a living anyway?" "He's an electrician at the power company." "Why doesn't he like girls?" "How do you know he doesn't like girls?" "I overheard some of the stuff he said to you in the kitchen." "He's gay, Rhonda." "Oh. Why are you then always hanging out with him? You're not gay." "It's complicated." An hour later, all three teens were passed out after smoking pot, drinking alcohol, and huffing fumes. 6:06 a.m. Rhonda woke. She had a splitting headache. She felt a sharp pain in her side from someone kicking her in the ribs. Someone was shouting at her, saying, "Wake up, bitch!" Her first thought was that it was her father, Ben Williams. But of course, when she woke, she was still in Dean Corll's house. She was on her back and felt something hard pressing into her shoulder blades. Her hands were in cuffs, and her feet were tightly bound. She experienced difficulty breathing because there was a gag in her mouth. When Rhonda turned to her left, she saw Tim Curley naked on his stomach. He was tied to the same plywood board as her. He was also gagged. There was a large transparent plastic sheet on the carpet. Rhonda turned her head to the right. Dean Corll, dressed only in a pair of boxer shorts, bent over to remove a strip of duct tape from Wayne's mouth. Wayne was still wearing the clothes he had on hours before, but he was also handcuffed and bound at his feet. With the tape now removed, Wayne said to Corll, "What the hell, Dean? What are you doing?" "Man, you blew everything bringing this girl here." Dean kicked Rhonda hard in her chest. "I'm so fucking angry with you, Wayne. Today is the day I am teaching you a lesson." "Dean, please untie me." "I'm going to kill you all, but first I am going to have my fun with you." "Let me loose. If you untie me, I will help you kill them." Meanwhile, Tim was struggling to break free from his restraints, panicking into hysteria. Dean glared at Wayne for a minute. He said, "All right, Wayne, but if you try anything stupid, I will send a bullet into your brain. Do you understand me?" Yes, Dean." Dean picked up his pistol and put it into the waistband of his boxers. He grabbed Wayne by his shoulder and dragged him out of the room. Wayne reminded Dean that there was a gas leak in the stove. Dean said, "Forget about the damn stove. I am going to untie your feet first. If you try to run away, I'm going to shoot you in the back. So make sure you sit tight, pal." Wayne didn't raise any objections. "Are you going to help me torture them?" "Yes, I am." When Dean and Wayne returned to the room where Corll's prisoners were incarcerated, Dean held a transistor radio under his left arm and held his pistol in his right. He placed the radio on the floor in a corner. Wayne was still dressed and his restraints had been removed. He had an 18-inch hunting knife tucked into his cowboy belt. Dean said to him, "Take care of her." He left the room. Moments later, when the coast was clear, Wayne removed the tape in the cotton gag from Rhonda's mouth. Still groggy, she lifted her head and said, "Wayne, is this for real?" "Yes, I'm afraid it is." "Are you going to do anything about it?" Wayne stroked her hair. "Everything is going to be okay, Rhonda. I'm going to get you out of here. Don't you worry." Dean returned to the room. He was carrying his metallic toolbox. He put it down on the floor next to the radio. Rhonda watched him place the gun on the nightstand by the door. He removed his boxer shorts. He said to Wayne, "Cut off Rhonda's clothes." Wayne knelt and cut Rhonda's jeans and panties to shreds. She begged him to spare her top. She said, "Please don't, Wayne. It's my friend Sheila's top. You can take it off, but please don't ruin it." Dean gave a nod of approval to Wayne, and the shirt was removed without being cut. Corll said to Wayne, "Come with me." Wayne followed Dean out of the room while mouthing the words, "It's gonna be okay," to Rhonda. Once she was alone in the room with Tim, she whispered to him, "Wayne is going to rescue us. Just play along, all right?" Tim didn't buy it. 3 minutes later, Dean and Wayne returned to the torture chamber. Corll made an announcement to his captives. "Here's what's going to happen now, boys and girls. Wayne is going to have sex with you, Rhonda, while I'm going to enjoy young Timothy over there. Then we are going to murder the both of you." Dean advanced toward Tim Curley. Tim was distraught. Wayne said to Corll, "Dean, can I please take Rhonda into the room next door?" "No, you will do it in here. Take off your pants. Now!" In defiance of Dean Corll's directive to rape Rhonda, Wayne deviated from that course and ran to the nightstand. He grabbed Dean's pistol and pointed it at Dean. He took 3 steps back and shouted, "You've gone far enough, Dean. I can't go on any longer. I can't have you killing any more of my friends." Dean stepped away from Tim Curley. He walked sidewise toward the door. His hands were on his hips. He said, "Come on, kill me, Wayne. You won't do it." "Yes, I will. I can and I will. It's over, man." "You won't do it." Everybody waited through a very tense moment to see if Dean Corll's skepticism had any basis in reality. Wayne Henley literally shot a hole through that silence when he pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Dean in the side of his head. He staggered out of the room and down the corridor. He was screaming from the pain. Wayne shot him twice in his left shoulder. After his body spun around in a twisting motion, Corll slumped down to the floor. Wayne shot him 3 more times, all in his lower back. A large pool of blood expanded toward the walls from underneath Dean's torso. Dean Corll was dead. The only noise to usher the silence into decay was Rhonda's weeping, though it certainly wasn't for Dean Corll's sake. Wayne called the police. The operator said, "This is the Pasadena Police Department. How can we help?" "Y'all better come here right now. I just killed a man." Shaping what he had just done into audible language left Wayne in a panic as he considered the reality of his actions. The operator said, "May I have your name, please?" "Elmer Wayne Henley." "What's the address?" "It's 2020 Lamar Drive." "We'll dispatch someone right away. Just wait there." While they waited for the police to arrive, Tim turned to Wayne and said, "Damn it, Wayne. I can't believe you just shot him dead like that. It was insane, man. I've done that 4 or 5 times already." "What?" "I'm going to jail, Tim." Wayne lit a cigarette and inhaled deeply. "You know, if you weren't my friend, I could have gotten $200 for you." Tim didn't feel grateful, only perplexed. After showing Patrolman A.B. Jameson the crime scene and Dean Corll's corpse, Wayne Henley was taken into custody. After having his Miranda rights recited to him, Wayne shouted to Jameson, "I don't care who knows it. I have to get it off my chest." Wayne clutched his head. He started crying. "I'm done living a lie. I want to make things right." Wayne, Tim, and Rhonda were taken to a local police station for questioning. Jameson handed the crime scene to detectives once they arrived. They took in the items they saw in the master bedroom. A plywood board measuring 8 by 3 feet with handcuffs attached to 2 corners and nylon ropes to the other 2. A .22 caliber pistol. A bayonet-like knife. Duct tape. Rolls of clear plastic of the same kind that was laid out over the floor. 8 pairs of handcuffs. Several rubber dildos. Thin glass tubes. Petroleum jelly. A whip. Lengths of nylon rope. During questioning, after Wayne described the events that happened the previous evening that led up to Dean Corll being murdered, Wayne became unglued. He had to get the horrors he witnessed in the company of Dean Corll off his chest. The detective said, "How long have you known Mr. Corll?" "About 2 years now." Suddenly Wayne jumped to his feet. He had reached a boiling point, and no kind of lid could prevent the truth from spilling over. He said, "We killed several boys." After providing the detectives with details about the circumstances under which he and David Brooks assisted Dean Corll with his crimes, Wayne told the interrogator he knew where their bodies were buried and that he would assist the police with their reconnaissance. The key location was the boat shed. The officers dug out corpse after corpse, all young men at varied degrees of decomposition. They were all naked. Some still had rags stuffed in their mouths. Some were still bound. Some had ligatures tied around their necks. A few had bullet wounds in their skulls. The first bodies buried were skeletal. The stench was nauseating and overpowering. 17 bodies were exhumed. Wayne still had no illusions about his role in the torture and murder of Dean Corll's victims. This is an excerpt from his interview with a reporter from ABC 13 News. "Dean wanted to kill me. He was mad because I brought the chick over there. I thought it was safe to take her to Dean's house. I didn't know any better." The reporter said, "But now he cannot kill any more boys." "I know, but it was still all my fault. I can't help but feel guilty." "Why is that?" "Because I introduced Dean to them boys. I caused them to be dead." David Brooks turned himself into police. David and Wayne accompanied police to Dean's stepfather's cabin at Lake Sam Rayburn. When police exhumed the 4th cadaver, David Brooks broke down. He wept. He said, "I cannot take this anymore." 6 corpses were dug out in the Lake Sam Rayburn area. The final bodies exhumed were dug up at Jefferson County Beach. That brought Dean Corll's official body count to 28. August 13th, 1973. A grand jury convened to hear evidence against Wayne Henley, David Brooks, and Dean Corll. The witnesses were Timothy Curley, Rhonda Williams, and a young man by the name of Billy Rittinger. David Brooks managed to persuade Dean Corll to release him. Billy was tied to the torture board before he was released, which was just as damning to the defendant's chances of being acquitted. Billy was asked by the jury why he didn't report the incident to police at the time. He said, "I was too scared he would come after me again, and I felt too humiliated to speak to anyone about it." David Brooks was indicted on 4 counts of murder. Wayne Henley was indicted on 6 counts of murder. Bail was set at $100,000 for each of them. Wayne wasn't charged for the murder of Dean Corll, with this act being perceived by the court as a justifiable homicide. Dean Corll was adjudged unimputable by death. The case went to trial. David and Wayne were tried separately. As before, Timothy, Rhonda, and Billy testified as witnesses for the prosecution. Wayne's trial began on July 1st, 1974. Taking advice from his attorney, Wayne did not take the stand. On July 15th, after 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Elmer Wayne Henley guilty on all 6 charges of murder. 3 weeks later, he was sentenced to 99 years in prison for each conviction, to be served consecutively. David's trial began on February 27, 1975. His attorney's contention was that David didn't commit any of the murders, that Dean Corll and Wayne Henley carried out all the torture and executions. The assistant district attorney refuted this, saying, "The defendant was in on the murderous rampage from the very beginning. He tells you he was a cheerleader, if nothing else. That's what he was telling you about his presence, but you know he was in on it." As with Wayne's trial, the jury only needed 90 minutes of deliberation to deliver a guilty verdict. He received a life sentence. March 1975. Houston police investigated an abandoned house in the Heights. They discovered a stash of homosexual pornography. Film reels and photographs were found that featured images of teenage boys. 11 of the 16 boys depicted were victims of Dean Corll. The worst human monster of this story may have been murdered, preventing future tortures and killings. While this truth is self-evident, it is also true that Dean Corll never faced the families of his victims and the unforgiving but unbiased condemnation of the courts. We'll just have to live with the fact that he left a blemish on mankind. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.